By the way, I should just say I'm always used to being in that chair with the pithy answers instead of the questions. So you guys are giving me good practice, so thank you. Kris, I have worked with you now for a while, and you are a kind of storied person at Tanium because you keep on telling us all the things we're supposed to be building, and then we build them and other people like them. So I just want to tell you that I'm really excited to have you up here.
Oh, thanks, Orion. It's great to be here, and you guys are very good at that, along with your previous guest. We seem to see some things and maybe see around some corners and help us both out.
That's the plan. So I would love you, I think a lot of people obviously know Accenture, but they don't really know how Accenture looks from the inside. Can you describe for me the environment, kind of what you guys are managing on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. The most notable thing probably about Accenture for most everyone is our scale. We have north of 700,000 employees now, 720, I think at last count. We have 4 or 5 million cloud objects. We have a lot of diversity in terms of both geography, work location, as well as industry, right? So we have to have a tool set that can really meet the needs of all of those different types of clients in the different environments they find themselves in. I think another interesting thing about us is we have always been in more of the zero trust model. We never had a closed corporate network, or if we did, it was a long time ago, back when we were Arthur Andersen, so way back. So we've kind of grown up in this cloud, always available environment.
And you've been using Tanium for a while. We've been working with you guys. Yeah. Can you describe for me kind of the vendor population? I don't mean names, but like kind of the vendor community and what you're looking for from them to be able to operate 700,000+ devices and all that?
Yeah, sure. There's a few vendors that we work with that I would put in our top ranks. You are surely one of them. So is Rob and Microsoft. They're wonderful. I'll say there's a number of things that we look for. Scalability is important. And scalability doesn't just mean I can operate 700,000 endpoints. It means that I can do releases. I can roll out to 5,000 and try it out and make sure that it works right. I can handle the exceptions, like the German Works Council members who can't be on DLP, right? There are things like that you don't really think about if you're maybe a smaller business, but for anybody who's a multinational like us are super important. So that's one aspect. Strategic, though, is really maybe the more important one. I need to be able to work with a vendor, and my group needs to be able to work with a vendor that can morph and meet our needs as they change, right? Vendors can't be static. If you're static, you're going to fail. And working with you guys, honestly, to fill gaps that we have from all these little niche products that don't quite work together, that we all wish were one big platform, that's important to be able to do. And you guys have been great at that, and that's a very big deal for us. We have to do that. And then I think a final thing is interoperability. You have to work with the other vendors that are out there. We work with so many, and if you're a vendor that just can't play nicely with others, and your code doesn't integrate and your signal doesn't integrate, it's not helpful for us, right? So you got to meet those criteria to really get in the door. And we find that when we hire vendors who do all those things, our world's a better place.
No question. And by the way, it's interesting. Our lives get easier as vendors if we pre-integrate things, because one of the hardest things to do is watch a customer try and figure out how to make products work together that are not designed to do that, which may not be possible in some cases, and bang your head against the wall. So
it's a little bit our business, but it's not really how we want to be spending our time.
No,
right? we want to add value and help our clients' businesses grow and all that. We don't want to. I mean, we can do it, but we don't enjoy it.
Yes, it's also a responsibility that more and more, I think you're telling vendors, if you don't take it, I'm not going to deal with you, which is, I think, really helpful. So if you think about operating this massive environment, And you think about getting phone calls, like, you and I were sitting together at dinner last night,
Yep.
and you told me you spent a bunch of the time yesterday helping a customer. And I was kind of thinking about that after dinner. Your job is to operate the internal environment, but you guys are actually subject matter experts in security at a level where your customers are constantly calling you as well to the internal IT security team, because you guys are the SMEs on a lot of stuff. How does that work?
Yeah, it happens. With many of our client relationships, we are a core part of their business, right? We do some of the back office processing that is not not super value add for them, but us taking it helps, or we help them run their network or what have you. And so often when we do see an incident, or we do see a threat actor working against one of our clients, accountabilities are not 100% clear at the time of that, at the time of that first signal. So we just get directly involved, right? We'll sort out the contract and whatever later. We're going to help our clients, right? And I do have a great team internally, a great response team, and we're very, I would say they're very skilled at using the tooling at their hand. So we'll jump in and help the client as long as it continues to make sense to help the client. I think that team has built that reputation through kind of I'll say the zero client model, right? We're always our first client on stuff. We very much, we like to say we drink our own champagne like everybody does, but we actually very much try out stuff that we're going to sell in the market before we do it. So we do become pretty serious experts on lots of little niche products, unfortunately, but security and response in general.
I someday, maybe right after this, I'm going to look up when eat your own dog food turned into drink your own champagne. I thought that was very clever. The first time I heard that, I was like, that is a much better expression. I'm going to use that new one. Okay, talk to me about the big challenges that are unsolved now. So, we've worked with you guys, Microsoft has worked with you guys, a lot of companies have worked with you guys to, I think, probably instrument capabilities that are foundational, but there's always in our business the next frontier of issue that we don't think is solved. What's there?
Well, I'm going to ignore the threats I can't do anything about, right? So I can't control, world politics and all that, right? That's interesting, but from a practical perspective, I don't think it's our biggest one. One challenge we have, and you and Rob really spoke quite a bit about it, we have all these little niche tools. There's this tool paradox where we have all these niche tools. It seems like there's a billion little tools, but yet we don't have the tools we need, and we don't have the coverage we need, and we all have to use products like yours to cover all the gaps that are out there and all the little, the misfit square pegs and round holes that don't quite do the trick. So I think that continues to be a challenge. I mean, I'm scared to death always that there's some little gap that we didn't see that isn't covered. So I think that's a big challenge for the industry. I often hear security compared to finance. When you think about finance and financial controls, it's a well understood problem. I don't think we're quite there yet with security. We're close, but we're not there yet. I think that's probably a big challenge. I think another more interesting short-term challenge that there's not a great tool for is this crossover from people's private social network lives into their work lives. We see that a lot. We see now much more interesting social engineering attacks. We see, LinkedIn, for example, we had all the proliferation of the fake profiles. We see that on Twitter, right? I think that is more of a problem for businesses than it was 3 years ago. I know it's a challenge for us and our clients. So I think that's an interesting one. The tooling one though kills me, and then one that I'm interested to talk to you about at some point. Software as a service, configurations. Man, that's hard.
Yep.
All those little plugins, that's a tricky one. So Is that
The good
enough
news is,
for you?
I
Have
mean,
made you
we
sad
may not
yet?
be able to solve the last one on stage, but Twitter, I think, has solved itself. So you don't have to worry about that one anymore.
Let's hope so.
That's good news. One less social network to worry about. Okay, so that all makes sense. You know, I will say, on the point solution problem, I was having a really super interesting conversation with one of your peers. He runs a big bank, and he was saying, you know, after SolarWinds and Kaseya and all this Log4j stuff and whatever, I'm realizing I introduced 50 different command and control infrastructures into my bank, and every one of them touches endpoints or the network equipment, and they all have a cloud-hosted service, and they all have self-updating. And I'm now convinced that I am actually the biggest security risk to the bank because of these 50 things, some of which were written by two guys and a dog, and the dog was not coding, so it was really the two guys. And like, it's just, you know, if you look at what security's had to do to cover all these gaps, sometimes it's created gaps in the process. And I think that that's something that, you know, as a company that spends a lot of our energy on securing our own code base because of who we serve, you know, it's something that I worry about every day. And in spite of the fact that we have resources to do it right, it's a concern. And I do think a lot of our customers have had to introduce risk that they didn't fully understand. And I think software bill of materials now is really highlighting that risk, because it's not just the mistakes that the vendor made themselves. It may be the mistakes of libraries that they ingested because they wanted to, you know, shortcut something, and it was already built and they absorbed it. And then now we've got all these vulnerabilities that we don't even know about necessarily that are creeping into the environment.
I completely agree. I mean, software supply chain, I didn't mention it, certainly is a risk, and it's one that we're concerned about. We've used your product a number of times as these 0 days have come out to find out, you know, where we had all this stuff. I think that's a big deal. I'm hopeful that the executive order will help with that, and that we'll see more companies doing proper software bill of materials, doing proper secure development that will help us all. I don't know that that's a perfect solution, but I think it'll help. You know, I also think we have this long tail that we all have to be aware of, you know, software bill of materials, where we have, you know, these important parts of the fabric of the internet, the fabric of how all the plumbing works, like, you know, TLS, right? That are, you know, they have a long history of open source, and there are many other like, I mean, Linux in general, right? It's a tricky thing, and I think that's part of the answer.
Yeah, I had somebody quantify recently how much of our engineering resources goes into our own product security, and, you know, 4 eyes validation on every check-in, and building in an air gap, and doing all these things, you know, having third parties that review everything before we release it, and all this stuff. And I just realized that if we rewound 10 years and Tanium didn't have all of you, there's no way we could do that. And you know, if you then take it to an open source library, which is written literally in many cases by a couple people, and like, if we're going to be honest, a lot of people here did not know what Log4j was before that announcement. It really does hit home. So yeah, look, I mean, I think we're going to be talking about SBOM and what we're going to be doing there when Nick presents it. But this is an opportunity, I think, for our industry to come together with you and give you at least the tooling where you can be thoughtful about what you're introducing. Okay, so let's talk about the people now. 10 years ago, and you look at a security professional 10 years ago, and you look at one now, what changed? Like, if you want to look at the successful people who are really, you know, what you consider exceptional within your team, what did they look like 10 years ago? What do they look like now?
Yeah, that's well, I'll say a couple of traits. I think 10 years ago, we saw a lot of people who were security first and technology second. A lot of that, and they weren't always particularly good administrators. They weren't particularly good communicators. I think what I see today, when I look at the most successful security people out there, many of them do have a deep technology background. I think, strangely, it's somehow gotten more technical over the last 10 years. I don't know how that happens, but it has. And communications is so critical. It's such a tough subject matter. It just really is. Security is so tricky, and you add in technology on top of it, you have to be able to communicate to to non-experts who are making budget decisions, who are maybe they're a team lead and you want them to approve your project. Maybe they're a board of directors and you need them to approve your budget.
Yep.
Right? I think those traits are super important to have. And by the way, those are not innate traits. Those are traits that can be built. Like you can make yourself better technology. You can make yourself a better communicator. So, if you don't feel like you're one of those people today, you can be one of those people tomorrow, I assure you.
I will say the number of CISOs that I've seen who've come either from ops or from finance or from some non-standard, non-historically standard way in is pretty striking. And a conversation I had recently really sticks in my mind, which is somebody who came from a financial background, got placed in as a CISO, and he said, Ryan, you're telling me that I probably am missing 20% of my assets. I come from a business where if you miss $1, you get fired, right? Like if you went to the facilities guy and you said, hey, how many facilities do we have? And he said, I have between 80 and 100, he'd be fired. If you have, your revenue count and you're like, how much revenue do you have? Well, $8 to $10 billion, fired. And if you go to a CISO and you say, how many assets do you have? It's kind of acceptable to say I have between 80 and 100,000, and you kind of get away with it. And he said, that's going to have to change because I'm reporting to the board in the same profile that I used to report my finance data. I'm reporting my security data, and I have to be better than that. So
I think it's another important trait, that good operational background, like how to own a thing and run it every day, keep the trains running on time, know how many trains there are. Those are important qualities in security people now. I mean, people still talk to me about assets all the time.
Yep.
It's a big challenge.
Last question for you. So we probably both know the former CISO at Uber who had a really, really bad last couple of months. And you think about what happened there, and I think it actually shook a lot of CISOs because we're not used to trying to figure out what to do in a breach and then going to jail. No. So can you tell me how that's changed the way your friends, not you were always doing it perfectly, but your friends are thinking about this? What does that do to an ecosystem when someone a lot of us knew pretty well made a mistake, went to jail, or is going to jail, or maybe not going to jail? I mean, I'm not in the...
Yeah, well, he's certainly convicted, right? And I think the way to view that is a reminder of the trust that the world puts in us as security professionals. We are expected to have integrity above all else, right? We can't. And when one of ours makes a bad decision, in this case, it was more than just non-disclosure. There was quite a bit more to it than that, but it was a bad decision, right? It paints us all with a brush. And I think we all have a responsibility to each other to act with integrity and to admit to mistakes and breaches and provide full disclosure so we can all get better, and also so that the rest of the world doesn't have this bizarro expectation that their company's never going to get breached, right? Because it's going to happen to all of us. And I think handling it with professionalism, integrity, and disclosure is important, right? It's important because when you don't, you might go to jail, right? If you lie about things.
And you might really hurt your company, and you might really
hurt
your
hurt
customers.
Everybody else in this room.
100%. Well, look, I deeply appreciate the time. We're going to cede the floor to people who are going to show you things that are more interesting than my mouth moving. But I really, really deeply appreciate this, and I'm excited to get to sit right over there and watch the rest of this. So thank you, guys.